Hi there, and welcome to this latest episode of Totally Unscripted. We, as always, try and find ways to allow people to connect and join the Hangout. But if you would like to join us in the Hangout, I've put the link in the YouTube comments. I put it on the YouTube event page as well. And I've put it on the Totally Unscripted post. So plenty of room if you want to come in. So welcome to episode 5, which is the Black Friday special. So hopefully we've got some bargain basement treats for you. We've got some bits and pieces to cover, so we'll cover the news in a second. I get a turn with the talking stick, and I'll be going through the how you can use the Slides API with Google Apps Script. Spencer is going to talk us through some ways that you can customize the script editor IDE to make it a bit more beneficial, easier to use, and Bruce has got some stuff on polling. So I think that's about the shape of the program so far. So any bits and pieces of news we want to just highlight, guys?
Hey, can you guys hear me now?
Hi there.
Hi,
Yeah, we
good
can.
morning. Yeah, happy Black Friday.
So I think we'll cover the Slides API, which is one of the kind of the main pieces of news that's come out since the last show. But also Bruce and I were fortunate to be invited across the Mountain View a couple of weeks ago. So we got some time with the Google Apps Script team and also some of the other Google developers with various APIs there. Unfortunately, a lot of the stuff that we got shown is not for public information yet, but I think Bruce would agree that it seems that Google are committed to AppScript. So that's quite often one of the questions I get asked when I'm doing presentations on Google AppScript is, is it going to be around in the future? And certainly from the investment that they've put in with various features and products coming out, hopefully not too, hopefully quite soon, it looks good. Would you agree with that, Bruce?
Yeah, I definitely think so. We met some of the team that work on the various products, and they were very enthusiastic about what they were doing. They showed us lots of good things that are coming up, and we really came away feeling fairly confident that this is a platform that they're going to develop and stick with.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll be able to cover some of those new developments in future shows. So there's always you never quite know with release timelines with Google. So hopefully we'll see something this year, but if not, hopefully there'll be stuff early next year. So moving on, so one of the other releases that have come out recently, as I mentioned, was the Slides API. So this isn't incorporated in Google Apps Script as a service or an advanced service. So it's actually quite easy to use if you've used the Sheets API. So this is the external API for Sheets. You'll probably recognize the workflows for it. So what I thought I would do is just give you a quick kind of demonstration of what you can do with the Slides API and how to set it up. So I'm just going to share my screen, so you bear with me for a second. So there's a couple of use cases Google mentioned within their product launch. So things like using templating or just updating key bits of text and information in a slide deck quickly and programmatically. So here I've got a demonstration deck and it's got two placeholders set up already. So we've got a name placeholder here, and we just got a shape placeholder up in the top corner here. So what we're going to do is just run a script that is going to make a copy of this presentation, and then it's going to we're going to just update the name here, and we're going to throw in a logo in this placeholder here. So I've prepared a script. You can also view this on my blog, and I'll share the scripts. I'll share a link to that later. So a lot of this is actually made a lot easier thanks to Spencer and the magic of his Google directory API, which basically generates libraries for all the Google APIs. So there's a couple things to set up. So because this isn't a built-in service, we're calling one of the libraries Spencer has created. So this is for the Slides API. So usual sort of thing, we adding the library, we can enter the code in there. I've already done that. For this example, I've actually renamed the identifier. So this is an identifier that's used quite often in Python versions of the Google client libraries. The reason I've done that is this is actually an example that I've ported from Wesley Chun, who works for Google, and there's a blog post explaining that. So the last thing we need to do in terms of setup, having installed the library, is just enable the library API through the developer console. So again, if you haven't done this before, it's relatively straightforward, just a case of clicking on a couple of links. So we're into Google Developer Console, and so we can just select the APIs we want to enable for our AppScript project. So I'm going to select the Slides API, and I think Google have kind of hidden this button up here. I think it's easy to miss if you're not used to this sort of thing. So we can now see that this is enabled. So I can just shut those down. And I'm just going to quickly talk through some of the script. So we're just setting up a couple of variables here. So these are basically going to be some of the search strings that we're going to use just to search for the image and the demonstration template I showed. Obviously, there's lots of other ways of you gathering, file IDs and passing file IDs in your scripts. This is the way Wesley had done it. So I thought I'd just copy what the way he'd set up his code, just so people could see the differences between Python and Google AppScript. So here's the first call. So this is because we're using a library to access the Slides API. We're going to pass in our token. So one of the nice things that I think it was Spencer spotted, or possibly Romain, was if you're using Drive App or Spreadsheets API, or sorry, Spreadsheets app within your project, then you can just use the tokens that those generate and pass those into the Slides library. So it's, if you're using those, it's really easy to set up. So we're just passing those in with a function. So next couple of lines are kind of fairly standard stuff. So we're just going to search for that Slides API template demo, and we're just going to make a copy of it and just grab the ID of that new copy. The next thing we're going to do is, actually, what I might just do is, if I just fire up the debugger, what you can actually see is how the slide object is returned from the API. This is actually quite a useful way if you're wanting. You'll see further in the code in terms of how we're passing updates to the slide deck. It's actually useful to see how the slide is, represented in an object format. So you can see the different page elements. So for example, let me just see if I can find one that I recognize. So for example, we've got a rectangle here, and we've got the shape properties. So there's various, information about, the color and position. So just going back to the code for a second. So all this part of the code is doing is actually looking for our rectangle. So all it's doing is looking for this shape object here. And we're just holding that in the variable object. And the next bit, so now that we know where we've got our object, the next part is we're going to get the image that we're going to use to replace the rectangle. So we're just again getting a file by a name from Drive app. One of the interesting things with the Slides API, when you're incorporating images into changes to slides, is it needs a public URL for that image. So there are a couple of ways around this. I was a bit surprised that there wasn't native Google Drive integration into this, so that you could just provide, a file ID instead of an image URL. But there are a couple of ways that you can get around this. So I don't think these are documented, so they may disappear. But one nice way is if you just get the download URL for the image, and you can actually append an access token, which is our script project auth token, to the end of that URL, and that basically gives a temporary URL that the Slides API can then use to pull the image into the slide. There's another way that you can do this, which is similar sort of idea. This one is using another undocumented URL. In this case, the image would need to be shared for this to work. So you might want to stick to the download URL method, just to save having to share images. In terms of making changes to our copied slide deck, basically we pass those in as a JSON object. So it's very much kind of similar to the Sheets API in terms of making changes to text and cells and properties. So for example, you've got various verbs that you can use. So this one, we're replacing all text. So here it's just using a search string. So it's looking for our mustached name, and we're just getting replacing that text. And for the image, we've got the passing in the image URL, and this is where we're pulling back some of the existing slide information. So we're actually pulling the size from the rectangle to basically resize our image to fit, and again, any sort of transformation. So if that rectangle was rotated, then we're just using the existing information and passing it back in when we're creating our image. And last one is just deleting our rectangle. So that JSON object covers everything that we want to do with our slide. And so the last step is actually to pass those commands in. So if you look at in fact, let me just show you. If you look at the autocomplete on slides. There's, we've not got many methods here. So everything is really handled by passing in commands via the JSON object. So we're doing a batch update. So the deck ID is just the presentation ID, and then all our requests. So if the demo gods are with me and I hit run, it's all fired off okay. And so if I go into my drive folder, you can see it's now got hello world, and it's replaced the image. Easy peasy.
Very good. So once you got your Google Now going, you can do that by gestures.
So Bruce, as you've used the Sheets API, do you recognize some of the ways that they're structuring the code and the API calls?
Yeah, they've pretty much standardized that. One of the key benefits, I think, is this idea of batching, because what it means is that you can do a whole string of things and it does it in the order that you need it to do it in. So rather than calling the API, 50 times, and then dealing with mistakes and dealing with quotas and everything else, you're making one call with 50 things in the call, which is a much better way of doing it.
And that's the batch updates for, that's the latest version of the Sheets API you're referring to?
Yeah.
Okay.
It seems to be the trend, given Sheets and Slides are, I think, the last two APIs to come out from Google. So I'd imagine they'll if whoever's writing these is kept employed, we might see more similar. But I agree that having a batch update with one hit to the URL is nice. And
I think I don't know if it was Spencer who was mentioning it in an earlier session that we had. One of the things I do with mine, my add-on is I like write queries to the sheet, and then there's lots of logic happening, and then you grab all the data at once and then do things with it and put it back. But I think I would like to be able to do that where you're are there fetches? I forget what you're doing, where you're basically querying the data from the sheet and loading it straight into a variable object and then doing some work and putting it back in. So I'd like to probably learn how to do that, and then probably get updated on how to do these batch updates. Mm-hmm. Probably something on my to-do list.
Yeah.
Okay. So what's up next then, Martin? Are we going to do I think we're going to do the Chrome add-on from Spencer. Thank you.
Do you want to go, Spencer?
Yeah. All right. So last month we talked about an extension that was put out by a guy named Leon Hart for GitHub. It adds GitHub capability to the IDE. So what I did is I looked. He released his extension open source on GitHub. So I took a look at the code and I realized that it's actually not that difficult to be able to add additional functionality to the IDE. So I took his code and I modified it, and I added the ability to add a toggle to this side. Let me share my screen real quick. And so, all right, does everything look good? You can see my screen?
Yeah, we got it. You probably need to blow up the font size a little bit, but yeah, we got it.
Sure. So, so right now with my extension, you usually have this big, huge bar on the side, and it takes up most of your space. So your code is getting pushed off to the side, and if there's a big list of files that you only need to look at once in a while. so I always deal with like dragging it over and dragging it back. And so what I did is I made a small little extension. It adds this button in the top left, and you can click on it, and it makes the sidebar just hide. And if you ever need it, you just drag your mouse to the left, and it pops out. And so it just adds a nice little auto hide feature to this, and gives you more space to work on, and especially if there's already a compact view, so you can actually start getting a nice big full work environment without so much clutter around the top and the bottom and sides by using this extension. If you can find it, it's in the Chrome web store. You can install it directly from there. It installs there, and then, again, if you look on my GitHub, the source is on my GitHub. And if you want to look at the original, which this is based upon, you can always look at Leon's GitHub for Gas GitHub, and you can dig through that code if you're inclined to look on this, and you can see that it's really not that, it doesn't take too much to be able to add additional functionality to the IDE to modify it to your needs.
But this only works on Chrome, right?
This is a Chrome extension only. Yeah.
Which is I don't know. I'm guessing that most people that use AppScript use Chrome anyway. But I think one of the issues is if you start to rely too many times on, cut off some people who are not necessarily doing that.
So, Spencer, there was an announcement not too long ago about Chrome Web Store changing, disappearing, or something.
Yeah, so that is not going to be for extensions. Okay. Chrome extensions are still going to be supported. What they're talking about is Chrome apps. Chrome apps was a different beast altogether than extensions and themes. Add-ons fall under the extensions kind of realm. So Chrome apps they were standalone programs that were packaged and distributed through the Chrome store. Some of them were written in native C++, and compiled to an app. Those are going to be disappearing in a few years. I know they're going to stick around on Chromebooks for a while, then they're going to be phased out there. But they've made no mention about removing extensions, which I would say 98% of everything on the Chrome Web Store is an extension.
And they were only talking about removing it from from Windows and stuff, weren't they? They weren't talking about removing it from Chromebooks, right?
Well, they're saying for now, no Chromebooks. I think they're giving Chromebooks an additional year on those to be able to let developers transition over. But I think after a year or so, I think they are going to disappear off Chromebooks.
Okay, I think that's great. I mean, if you can get more screen space out of the IDE, I think that's a really good thing. And there was another guy who a Chrome extension a little while ago about being able to change the skin of your IDE as well, which some people like.
Correct. And
so I think that I think the idea of having a kind of a place that we can put together a list of things that help to make the IDE better in an organized way, I think it would be a good thing to do. Well,
that's actually something that I've been looking and tinkering with. Is if too many extensions get into the IDE, you're going to start getting a messy IDE. So I was thinking of maybe possibly kind of getting together and kind of developing kind of like a unified way of almost like a plugin structure for the IDE, to where
I think that would be fantastic.
So I've been actually playing around with a plugin. Basically making a plugin extension and then having these apps as kind of add-ons that you add to the plugin. And I've got some interesting results on that already. So that might be something I can release. Maybe I'll even get to for the next one.
Yeah, I think that would be wonderful.
For the next release.
Yeah. Thanks, Spencer. That's good.
Yeah.
So we watch with interest. We'll put links up as well for people to find that extension, dig into the code. So I think next we've got Bruce, and you're going to do some stuff on showing how we can poll for changes within, I think, primarily add-ons.
Yeah, so not necessarily add-ons, but that's the main usage. So what this is about is that when you think about the Microsoft environment, they have they call them add-ins. It's a bit like Google add-ons. They appear in a sidebar or a dialog box, just like with Google Sheets and Google Docs. And the idea is that you're able to extend Office by creating these apps that sit on the side of Excel or whatever. Just exactly the same thing. But there's a massive difference, and that is that the Microsoft environment, you're actually addressing the object model of the spreadsheet to which you're attached directly. So in other words, what that means is that if someone makes a change in the UI or changes the data in the spreadsheet or something like this, you can immediately see it reflected in the add-on because you're using the same object model. On the other hand, there's only certain amounts of things you can actually do with that. So in other words, you can only do what the API can do. You can't make things up and that runs on the server and call them. You can't do that. But one of the great benefits is that if there's a change in the data or the position that someone is in a document or something like that, you can do what's called binding, which means that you can ask it to call you back if that happens. So in other words, your add-on can sit there doing nothing and get woken up by the fact that someone's changed some data. In Sheets, you can't do that because there isn't anything persistent going on in the server that could call you back, even if there was a mechanism to do it. So that means that when you're doing an add-on, it means your client has to be in control because the server isn't there unless you call it. So to be able to emulate that sort of behavior that you can do in Microsoft, in other words, react to changes in the document whenever they happen, you have to write something in the client that continually polls the server. Now that can get quite complicated, but actually if you use a kind of a boilerplate approach, then you don't have to write it every time. So when I write an add-on today, I have a boilerplate of code that I pull in, and it takes not very long to write an app that uses this technique. So let's take a look at this one. Can you? I don't know if I'm sharing my screen. I'm probably not. Hang on a second. There we go. What should I be sharing? I should be sharing my Chrome. No, what should I be sharing? Who knows? Am I sharing the right thing here?
Yeah, I can see your browser.
Okay, great. So for the purposes of going into how this works, I've got this spreadsheet here that's running a little sidebar. And it doesn't do much. All it does is to take whatever data is showing on the screen and show on the bottom a chart based on it, and in the top some data about where it is on the sheet. So this is telling us what active range is E7, which is where that is, the ID of the sheet, the sheet name that we're at. So we're at this water area place, and then a few other things. So the idea here is that every time that I do something on the sheet, it will immediately be reflected over on the sidebar. So if I go to population or something, you can see that the chart updated, and so did all the stuff about where we are on the sheet, etc. If I maybe change some data, let's just change that to something else, then you can see the chart immediately changes. I'll put it back, and the chart immediately changes again. So all that's going on. That's actually not easy to do unless you're polling from the stuff that's running on the client, which is the sidebar, back to the server to say what's happening now, what's happening, what's happening now. Now, when you think about it, that could be an awful waste of time if nothing's happening. So what you try and do is to minimize the amount of traffic from the server, which is in Google somewhere, to the client, which is in your machine, so that you don't have loads of data continuously flowing back and forwards. So you have to have a mechanism to say if nothing happened, then don't send much. So we're going to look at all those things right now. We'll take a quick look at the code. So let me bring that up a little bit. And I'll use Spencer's little thing to get rid of that. So what we're going to look at, now let me bring it back a minute, because what we're first of all going to look at is there's a lot of stuff here. And the reason is because, as I say, this is boilerplate stuff that I bring into add-on projects. So we're only going to be interested in one or two things here. So let's start by looking at the main app, which would be here. No, in fact, let's start by looking at the markup. In fact, let's get right back to the beginning. So this is my app. It's not much there. And just as a bit of background, if I write stuff that's got to run on the client, JavaScript, normally people would use HTML files for that, but I don't. I use JS files. So I use regular app script files, but run them on the client. And the reason I do that is because I can write code that can run on both the client and the server without having to duplicate it. So I've got these little functions that take care of all that business, but we're not going to go into that. So these are the files that I bring in for this app, and the ones that we're going to look at are process, render, and client watcher. So client watcher is the one that runs on the client and pulls back to the server from time to time. Render is the one that shows it on the screen, and process is the one that controls everything that's going on. So let's look now at the main app. So it only does a couple of things. It takes in all the Google stuff to do with drawing charts. It starts the app up, which is just about creating a space to report on errors. And then it starts the process off, which is essentially setting up all the data structures I'm going to need. And then it gets to this watch or start. And that simply means get the thing that watches the server going on the client. And that's all there is to the app. So very straightforward so far. Let's look at the initialize part. So we're going to go here. And here's initialize. So to use the watcher, you first of all have to tell it what you want it to watch. Okay, so I'm creating a new client watcher, and I'm saying that if anything happens to the sheet, in other words, which sheet he's on at any time, then do something. And the something that I want it to do is to update the navigation box. So if we go back to the spreadsheet for a moment, on sheet, if I change sheet, then it's saying update that stuff over here, okay, which is what it just did. And I'm saying on values, which means if any of the values change, then redraw the chart. So if I go back here and I change a value, and let's make that 0 or something, you can see that the chart changes. So in each of those cases, that on statement that we just looked at was being executed. And then I've got on active, which simply updates that navigation part again. And what that means is that if the area that's the active selection, in other words, if I select something like that, then you can see that the active selection over here changes to what I've selected. So you can see it all works fairly seamlessly. You wouldn't notice that there was anything peculiar going on here. You think it was really somehow detecting in real time what was happening on the sheet, although that's not actually what's happening. So that's all there is to it in terms of initializing things. You tell it what you want to watch and what to do when it happens. So now let's take a look at the client watcher now, which is the guy that does all the hard work. And we'll take a look at how that works. So first of all, we've got some settings. And the first one is the poll frequency, which says, how often do you want this to happen? I like to take up a prime number for that, but it's not really necessary. And that's really saying that every just over a second, go and have another look. And then we've got the data to take back. You can take back any data you like. I happen to be taking back both background colors and values here. So all those things that you've got in spreadsheet app, get values, spreadsheet app, get background colors and so on, you can put any of those in here. And that's what it's going to be sending back to you. And then this is the things it's able to do. So right now it can do, by the way, this isn't the one I use in my real add-ons, because I measure a lot of different things in here. I've cut it down for the purposes of this demo, because it would be here a lot longer if I didn't do that. So this is the things I'm allowing it to watch at the moment. And then finally, the scope is where to get the data from. So I can get it from the active selection. I can get from the data range, which is the whole sheet, or I can get it from a specifically selected range, which would have been specified in here if I'd said it. So all that describes how often to get it, what to get, and where to get it from. So once you've got that set up, you're good to go. So let's go back to so if you recall, back in the main app, we just simply started it. So another thing I'm using in here is promises. If you're not familiar with those, it's a way of handling lots of orchestration of asynchronous events. So you'll know that when you use google.script.run and stuff like that, it happens asynchronously, and normally you have to provide a callback for what to do if it fails and what to do if it succeeds. Now that's fine if you've only got like one or two, but if you've got many, which I often have, and I do have in this case, I've got many asynchronous things happen, any of which might happen at any time. It's much easier to use a promise mechanism to orchestrate them. And you'll see a little bit of that as we go through the rest of the code. So it starts by starting the polling mechanism. So we'll take a look at that. Now that calls this thing called poll wrapper, which we'll quickly look at. And all that does is it returns a promise again, because it's asynchronous. And it's the first thing it does is to test if the spreadsheet is actually on the screen. Because if it's not, if someone's on a different tab or the browser and not looking at it, there's no point in checking the data right now, because they're not going to look at it anyway. So that checks to see if that's happening. And if it is, then it kicks off a request to the server to go and get the current status of everything. And this provoke.run is just a promise version of google.script.run. The code's all here if you want to look at it. I'm not going to go into all at the moment, but you can. So this is saying run serverwatcher.poll and give it all these arguments. Okay? And if the guy is not looking at the screen right now, then there's nothing to do, but we do want to signal to whoever's calling this that we're all done. So I'm sending back a resolved promise. So let's get back to where we're calling that. So when all that's finished, it's going to do something. And the thing for it to do is if it got any data back from the server, then we need to check and see if anything has changed. Now, I mentioned earlier that what we don't want to do is to send data back if it hasn't changed, because then you're going to get loads of data coming back unnecessarily every second. So it uses a system of checksums. A checksum is a kind of a digest. You know when you download stuff from BitTorrent or in fact GitHub, there's a small code, and that code describes the contents of the file. And if the file changes, that code will change. It's just a small 30 characters or something like that. So instead of sending back the entire data from the spreadsheet, all I do is send back 30 characters for everything that I want to check. And if the client, when the client requests some data, that was back up here, one of the things it tells it is the data it already knows about using these checksums. So that means that if the server receives the same checksum as the current data now represents, it knows it doesn't have to send anything because the client already knows it. So what's happening here is that we're saying the data that we're going to currently store, because this current data is always going to contain the current status of the spreadsheet, either because it got some new stuff or because it already knew it. And then this checksum, if the data is different than what it used to be, then we'll know that something has changed. So now we're going to go through if you remember at the beginning in that initialize status, we said what to do if the sheet changes or something like that. So it's going to call, for every one of those that something has changed, it's going to call the function that's set up for that to happen with. So all that things together means that data doesn't get sent back if it hasn't changed. And your client function doesn't get called if nothing's changed. So there's actually very little disturbance, both in your internet connection, which you could get filled up with a big spreadsheet, or in your client being distracted and doing things it doesn't need to do. And really, that's probably only one more thing to look at, which is the thing that gets called by the client. So that's on the server side. We have this server watcher.poll. So we'll take a look at that. And it's here. So now this is running on the server. And it's been told to go off and do some things, which was all the arguments that we passed to it about the checksums and everything. So it does the usual spreadsheet type things like getting the data range and the active range and everything else. And then it checks to see what needs to be returned. So if you're interested in sheet, it's going to tell you everything about the current sheet. If you're interested in the active range, it'll tell you about all of that. And if you're interested in the values, it'll get whatever values you've asked for, whether it's background colors or values or whatever. And then later on it says, okay, so now I'm going to do this digest thing, which is to convert the data into a checksum. And I'm going to return the checksum that I now have. So what that means is that by checking to see the checksum that is just made versus the checksum that the client already knows about, it knows whether or not to send any data. So that's kind of a brief overview of how it works. I think it's fairly effective in the sense that, as I say, when you see it in real life happening, you wouldn't believe that all that stuff's going on behind the scenes. It's just really fairly seamless. So that's one way of doing it. There are other ways of doing it, each of which have got different drawbacks. So the latest version of the Drive API is actually based on the real-time API. So that's the API version 3. You're used to using version 2 up till now. And it has some new features, including changes and watching. So that means that you can watch out for changes that happen in your drive. So in this exact same app, I've made a web app as well. So now let me just run that. So what this is doing is it's watching for changes happening on my drive. So it's from a particular point in time. So if I was to go back to my spreadsheet here and maybe change something, let's just change that. You can see things happening over here. Check back again. And then go back to my web app, you'll see that a couple of things have happened. You'll see that a couple of files have been changed since the last time that I looked. So what we're doing here is that not only are we looking for things changing on the spreadsheet, which is fine for an add-on, we can actually also look for things changing from an external application. So this makes, there's another couple of things that have changed in the meantime. So that makes quite a useful sort of app. I can clear it, and what will happen now is it will start measuring again from this point in time. And I've found some interesting things. I just wrote it this morning. Interesting things in my drive happening that I had no idea what files they even are or who could be changing them. So that's quite a useful sort of diagnostic in any case. But the being able to do things on the spreadsheet, you can't do all of that through the Drive API. You can't, for example, know that someone selected a different area. You can't know that someone's changed the sheet. You can only know if they make actual changes to the drive. So this is probably still the best way of dealing with monitoring changes on your spreadsheet by doing this polling stuff. So that's kind of all I have. I know it was a lot of information in quite a short time, but I have published this, which gives you a little bit more stuff on it. And I have also put the source for this on GitHub and everything else if you want to take a look at that too. So that's kind of all. Any questions?
Yeah, that's pretty darn cool. I do have a couple of questions just about one of the things I've been thinking about is testing between versions of things that I'm working on. You know, so like comparing what sheets are doing. So this notion of the way you're using checksums, is there any way to do that if you just want to compare sheets? You know, like I don't suppose there's a way to do a diff between sheets or tabs out there.
Well, the way I do that is simply with this digest, which is actually we can probably look up what that is. It's using simple app script utilities. Let's just quickly find that. Okay, so find that again. Here it is. So that's the code for it there. Looks like a bit of a handful, but it's actually pretty straightforward. So what that's doing is to take a whole bunch of stuff that gets passed to it. In this case, it's going to be the array values, the data values, I should say. And it's doing a digest algorithm on them, a SHA-1, which converts it into a 30-character type of a code. And so what comes back is a string. And that string is a rather short one. And if anything has changed in the data, whether it be its dimensions or it's the position of data or the contents of the data, then that'll have a different code than it had before. So you can just compare before and after, and you've done it.
Oh, cool. Okay, and that's in the example code?
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
So that will just let you see that there is there is some difference between two sheets.
Yes.
Something changed, right?
Yeah. So, but there are, if you want to see what has changed, there are, I think, existing kind of diff JavaScript libraries that you could probably easily port into AppScript that would, let you know what has changed if that's important to you.
Actually, there's a diff library on my website as well if you want to find it.
Well, there you go. It's probably where I read it.
Thanks.
But I think the point here is though that you want to be able to, in the shortest possible amount of data, know what something used to be versus what it is right now. And if it's changed, then you need to do something in addition to what than ignoring it. So that's kind of like the purpose of it.
Right. Well, thank you.
And so obviously you're in Sheets. There is an on edit installable trigger, which obviously it doesn't let you know if people selected regions of the page.
Yeah.
It will only let you know if something has changed. Are you hooking into the on edit when you're?
No, not at all. I mean, the problem with that is that if you're on the client side, then the server needs to call the client, and the client's already running, and that's complicated. So it's much better for the client to be in control because the server isn't persistent. So ideally, if the server knew everything about it's a completely dumb thing. It's got no connection to the UI, apart from the on-edit thing, perhaps. But even if it was able to do that, then you would still have a problem with it. When you think of it, because so you noticed that something had changed. What would you then do?
Yeah. So so if you're running this in add-ons, which obviously is client run, you're not. You're better going with your route.
Well, exactly, yeah. Because obviously, if you're running pure server side, then you don't need to do any of this. But this is all about the disconnect, if you like, between an add-on and the server side UI, which, as I said at the beginning, doesn't exist in Microsoft, but does exist in Sheets.
It's pretty powerful stuff, particularly the way that you've packaged it all. So I can see how you can start knocking out lots of add-ons quite quickly.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, that's when you think about it, the two things that take ages in add-ons is all the the UI part of it and writing all the HTML and CSS and everything for that, and that's a different story. But there's also the communicating with the server and everything, which usually generally takes ages and you get problems and hard to debug and everything. If you've got a standard framework that does that, you don't need to bother about that anymore, you know.
What about in terms of quotas? Obviously, there's quotas for the amount of server time. Are you hitting into those issues with this technique?
No, because when you think about it, the amount of time that it's actually using, first of all, you've got to be using the add-on anyway. Secondly, you've got to be looking at it, which is what that invisible thing says. So it's only going to be doing it for as long as you're sitting in front of the spreadsheet, actually doing something, and also you're making changes.
So, if in theory though, if you had a really kind of must-use add-on that someone was sitting in front of all day using,
well, then I'd probably be making $100,000 a year off it. And figure out something to do. Yeah, you're right. I mean,
Yeah, like I, for example, use a similar technique in an add-on that I use that uses polling, and I find even with about 4,000 daily users, I'm only using 20% of my free quota for the API. So
yeah,
I don't even come close to even using the free quota. And once the free quota is done, then that means I'm popular enough should be able to leverage it for as a paid service. And then you just move into a paid service, and you get extra API calls through the developers console. So it's a very generous system that they get. You have to be really popular before you start hitting those kind of quotas.
Yeah.
From a memory and resource usage perspective, what is when you start your workflow and you open up the sidebar, what still is being used when you close your sidebar?
And what on your client?
Question makes sense. Yeah, like all the stuff you're running stops running when you close the sidebar, right? The sidebar has to be open for any of this to be going on. Now, what if you like declared a custom object and then that you wanted to use later? Because I noticed, like, say the add-on menus stay up even though you close the sidebar, right? The work that you've done setting some menus in whatever context you're in.
Yeah, the reason for that is because what you've done there is you've done that server side. You've done that in the UI of the spreadsheet app. Your sidebar, you've done that. So that's now added. That's now customized the menu of your UI. So it's persistent because it's part of. It's now part of Google Sheets, if you like, having done that. But the stuff on the client side is disposable. Once you've closed the sidebar, it's gone. And
if there is anything that you want to keep, there's various property stores that you can use.
Yeah, I was hoping to. Well, anyway, I don't want to take you offline. Yeah, I was hoping to replace how I'm using documents property service by having some kind of object that I'm using. But I don't know. I'll get around to figuring that out later. It works. It works fine. It works fine. But I'd like to replace it. I use the documents property service to keep track of what sheet is open within a certain context of my add-on. And I've been doing that so much, now that I know how all the property services work, it'd be nice to use document services for some other things like settings or something like that, and then achieve that another way. But the only way I could think of would be to persist a data structure but it would need to stay open, because the way my add-on works, you can start and restart it all you want, and you might want to just close it to get it out of your way and keep working, and then get back and do something via a menu or something like that.
Well, I think in an upcoming Totally Unscripted, we do have. In fact, we were going to do it last month. We never got around to it. How to manage settings in add-ons in terms of not only presenting them and making the whole business of setting them up straightforward, but also of saving their current state and their amended state and everything like that. So the next time you bring your add-on up, it remembers where it was. So that'll be one that we'll probably cover in a future session.
That's cool. Also, I don't know if do we have a master list? I know the people who do the app show, they were like shared their collateral for like they have like a master spreadsheet of all their production notes and stuff like that. Do we have anything like that for our scripted sessions?
I'll hand that to Martin.
No. Sounds like a lot of work to me.
Yeah, it's true. But I guess if you contribute a session, you could add your notes or something. I don't know.
It makes sense.
Yeah. Funny you should say that. But just today, I started. Let me just share my screen for a second. Where are we? So just today I started this. I don't know if you can see my screen. And I've got, today's, what we just talked about is documented there with all the materials and everything like that there. So I think, it would be a good idea if we were to do the same thing with each of the subjects that we cover. I think Martin posts it on the Google Plus place, but it's a bit hard to find because it's not so organized.
Well, so now we've all got access to new Google sites, which is probably something else we should have mentioned in the news. I should perhaps, saying that, the Classic might be better because I can access it with AppScript. I could
exactly, yeah, absolutely. So if you want to, I can, Martin, you and Spencer and I can talk offline. I can probably share this area, and you can dump stuff there and write about it if you want.
Sure.
And then if I can share here, I'm sure you just have to ask them, but this is the app show files that they shared.
Yeah.
Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
And where is there? I guess this is the inventory. Yeah, so they have a nice spreadsheet. I'm sure they wouldn't mind being reused to give us some ideas of some things, but it's just nice to have it so you can search for topics and things. And obviously they did a lot more work than we probably have time to do, but
and they get paid for it as well.
Right. Yeah. It's Black Friday, right? Everything's free. So anyway, I'll try and follow up on this, but see here. I'll post somewhere. I'll find out who the owner is and see how I got that. I've had it for a while, but I thought it was nice of them to share.
Yeah,
it makes sense. So I think.
How do I stop sharing?
I think it's something that we should look into. Well, I'm conscious that for Bruce, it's getting increasingly gloomy. For me, I'm almost there.
Why is it getting gloomy? Oh, you mean on my thing? It is, isn't it? Put the light on. I was wondering what you meant by that.
For Spencer, he's been, for me anyway, blacked out for the whole show. Yeah. So I think we might call it a wrap there. And thanks, Bruce and Spencer, for their bits and pieces. Thanks, Rudy, as well, for coming along and your contributions. We'll be back next month in December, and hopefully we'll have lots of...
Actually, I don't know if we will be, because it'll be Christmas, so we probably won't.
Hey, can I ask a quick question? How would you, if I wanted to have like a side session or something on something that I may or may not want to share, you guys open to that? How would I, create a session or something like that? I know.
Why don't you drop some mail about what it is, and we'll decide what would the best guy to.
Yeah, sure. And how do I send messages to you guys on here?
You can use Hangouts or connect us through Google Plus or any of those kind of ways.
Yeah, but I mean, how do you send a direct message in Google Plus?
Just select our name from Google Plus, and it'll only come to us.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I don't use it much.
Oh, okay.
No one does.
I laugh about that because Google Plus is supposed to be a nice, easy messaging system, but actually sending an individual message to an individual person is not that easy. You know,
it is. Once you
I don't know what.
Yeah.
Once you figure it out, but it's not intuitive.
Yeah.
So hold on, let me, because you asked and I've got a screen. Let me do that one. So you can click on public and then see more, and then you can, if you're following Totally Unscripted, so that will be a private message. It will just come to us.
Okay, and that's just the group and not everyone who's following Totally Unscripted?
It would just come to the moderators of Totally Unscripted. There's about 5 of us. So
okay, all right, thanks.
Or you can do something similar to, I probably shouldn't tell you this. So you can do this to contact Spencer all the time. So anyway, yes, I think we'll try and get one back.
Contact Spencer all the time?
I get a few contacts quite often.
Gotcha.
Sorry, Spencer. Anyway, I think we should try and get back in December. Well, I'll try and get a similar convenient time, maybe Christmas Eve or Christmas Day, something like that. When no one's around, we're interested. Anyway, thanks everyone. We'll catch you next time.
Thanks, Bon. Thanks, Petzl. Thanks, Trudy. Bye.
Bye.